بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the second session of Sarf studies. Last lesson we went over the definition of Sarf, the objective of studying Sarf, and the subject matter of Sarf. Now we're going to actually go into a discussion within the field of Sarf. Now, like we said before, Sarf usually touches upon verbs, right? So we're gonna go with that actually mention regarding verbs first of all, right? So a verb in Arabic is defined as fi'l. A fi'l is defined as a verb, right? When we have a verb, we can categorize verbs into three categories: فعل ماضي, فعل مضارع, فعل أمر. Now this is a categorization that is different compared to the categorization we did in our last Nahwa lesson. In the last Nahwa lesson, we did a categorization of verbs according to their tenses, right? From the perspective that there's a difference in meaning, but not necessarily a difference in form. There doesn't need to be a difference in form when we actually categorize the verbs. Okay, when it comes to the tenses, right? There doesn't need to be a difference in form, but there is a difference in meaning, right? Because over here there's a difference in meaning for all of these. But the hal and the mustaqbil, okay, the form is actually the same. So hence why this categorization of verbs in terms of their tenses is from the perspective that there's a difference in meaning and not necessarily form. But over here, when we're categorizing verbs according to their tenses, is from the perspective that there is a difference in both form and meaning. Okay, how do we know that? Look, let's analyze this. So you have a verb can either be فعل ماضي, فعل مضارع, or فعل أمر. A فعل ماضي is a past tense verb. So the past tense form of a verb will be within this category of فعل ماضي. فعل مضارع is the present or future tense. So both the present and future tense will be within فعل مضارع. Okay, will be within فعل مضارع. So you know the example that we gave over here in our last Nahwa lesson of yadribu. Okay, when we're actually categorizing verbs according to their tenses, when we say فعل مضارع, when we say فعل مضارع, يضرب حال, when يضرب is used for حال, which is the present tense, and يضرب is used for the مستقبل, which is the future tense, will both fall under this category of فعل مضارع, because فعل مضارع, it holds both present and future tense forms of verbs. And the form for the fi'l mudari is the same. So the present and future tense form is the same. So if you look over here, this is the present tense form and this is the future tense form. Notice that both of them, despite being categorized differently, they're in the same form. So this is in contrary to the English language, right? In the English language, for example, when we're actually trying to express a verb according to the present tense form, we will say something like, I am going. And when you want to do it for the future tense form, you will say something like, I will go. But that's not the same when you're actually speaking in the Arabic language, right? The present and the future tense form will be the same. The question that comes to mind is, how do we know the difference then? When we're actually reading Arabic and there's a fi'l mudari, how do we know whether it's the present tense form or the future tense form? You're going to have to look at context. You're going to have to look at the context and work it out yourself, whether it's the present tense form or whether it's the future tense form, meaning whether the fi'l mudari which is used is the present tense form or the future tense form. Does that make sense? Now we're going to actually look at verbs from a different perspective. So we're going to categorize verbs differently. This is according to how many root letters there are and if there are or if there are not any extra letters other than the root letters. So let's look at this, right? We have a verb, a fi'l, فعل can either be ثلاثي or رباعي, or if you want to be more precise, ثلاثي or رباعي, because there's a tashdid in the end, right? These yas at the end will actually have a tashdid. So a verb can either be ثلاثي or رباعي. So what does ثلاثي or ثلاثي mean? So a ثلاثي verb is a trilateral verb. A ruba'i verb is a quadrilateral verb. A ثلاثي verb is when there's three root letters, right? Hence why it's called trilateral. Ruba'i verb is when there's four root letters, hence why it's called quadrilateral. So when there's a thulathi verb that has three root letters, that thulathi verb is either going to be thulathi mujarrad, thulathi mazid fi. Thulathi mujarrad is when there's a trilateral verb, meaning there's three root letters and there's no extra letters. Okay, there's only three root letters, no extra letters. So the way you actually work out whether a verb is thulathi or a verb is rubai, and then afterwards you work out whether that thulathi verb is mujarrad, meaning thulathi mujarrad, or that thulathi verb is thulathi mazid fi. And if you work out that the verb is rubai, if it's rubai mujarrad or rubai mazid fi, the way you do it is you look at the past tense third person singular male form of the verb. Right? What does that mean? Verbs are going to have different forms. So let's look at examples of forms when it comes to verbs now. Right? Let's look at examples. Sorry, it's somewhere here. I actually have a chart somewhere here to actually show. Yeah, let's look at this, right? So example, let's look at just this angle because this is a large chart, right? So there's different forms of verbs. Let's actually look closer, right? So you have third person singular masculine tense of this verb nasara. So that would be nasara, he one man helped. And then the third person dual masculine tense. This should be tense, sorry. This needs to be changed to tense. I'll just change this really quick. Tense, the dual masculine tense is nasara. They two men helped. And the third person plural masculine tense is wrong. Sorry, you just notice it in the wrong time, don't you? Third person plural masculine tense is nasaru, and the third person singular feminine tense is nasarat, and the third person dual feminine tense is nasarata, and then nasarna, and then nasauta, and then nasautuma, and then nasautum, and then nasauti, and then nasautuma, and then nasautunna, and nasautu, and nasauna. It goes on until the end, right? Until we get to the third, the first person plural masculine or feminine tense. Does that make sense? So these are different forms of the same verb. When you want to actually identify whether the verb is thulathi, and then here thereafter identify whether the thulathi is mujarrad or mazid fi, or if you want to identify after finding out that the verb is rubai, whether it's rubai mujarrad or rubai mazid fi, you look at this form, the third person singular masculine tense form. The reason why you look at this form is because, look, if you look at any of the other forms, because of their form, you might actually get mixed up in what category they fall under. So, example, if you looked at the third person singular feminine tense form, is nasarat. Nasarat, there's a ta in the end. So, if you count all the letters over here, okay, if you use this form, then you have one, two, three, four letters. You're gonna think this is rubai now because it has four letters, and rubai verbs are four lettered. But this is not actually the case. You actually look at the third person singular masculine tense to actually figure out whether the verb in its entirety is thulathi or rubai, and after finding out it's thulathi, whether it's thulathi mujarrad or thulathi mazid fi, and after finding out that it's rubai, whether it's rubai mujarrad rubai mazid fi. So you look at this form. So you look at this nasara, and you look at how many letters there are. So you have one, which is a noon, then you have the swad, and then you have the ra. So there's three letters. So we know straight off the back that this is a thulathi verb. Now, when you actually identify, okay, how many letters there are in the third person singular masculine tense form of the verb. Now all of these forms are going to be thulathi. So what the category of this entire verb in of itself with all of its forms fall under will depend upon this, the third person singular masculine tense. So you look at the third person singular masculine tense, depending upon whether it's thulathi mujarrad, thulathi mazid fi, or rubai mujarrad or rubai mazid fi, will depend upon what all of these within the same verb, meaning the forms of the same verb, fall under. They all will fall under whatever this falls under. It's not like only this will fall under thulathi and everything else is different. Now you have to analyze all of these one by one separately. No, 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 no. You don't need to analyze these separately. You just analyze this form, and then depending upon what this is, everything else will fall under the same category of thulathi mujarrad or thulathi mazid fi or rubai mujarrad or rubai mazid fi. Does that make sense? I don't want you to be thinking that okay, you look at all of these separately and then you say that okay, this is thulathi, this is rubai because this is 3 letter and this is 4 letter. No, 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 no. You don't do that. You look at this form only, and depending upon what this form is, which category it falls under, will depend upon what all of these forms of the same verb falls under. Does that make sense? So that's that done, right? So let's go back to this chart over here. So we have verbs, they're either trilateral or quadrilateral. So trilateral verbs are verbs that are such that the third person singular male form of the verb only has 3 root letters and no extra letters. It doesn't have extra letters. Hence why it's called thulathi mujarrad. Right? Mujarrad means to be stripped of something, right? Someone's clothes to be stripped off. In this case, in the meaning of not having extra root letters, right? It's thulathi, it's trilateral without any extra letters. Example, nasara. Along with all the other forms, remember we say that nasara, nasara, nasaru, nasarat, nasrata, nasawna, all of these forms now are thulathi mujarrad. Once you found out that the third person singular male form of the verb is thulathi mujarrad, all the forms for this verb are also thulathi mujarrad. Right? They're not different. You look at this form, and we mentioned why, because if you look at the other forms, you're probably gonna get the wrong answer. You're gonna get the wrong answer, and you're gonna think that it's rubai, quadrilateral. Does that make sense? And then thulathi mazid fi, it also has 3 letters, but it has extra letters also. Hence why it's called mazid fi, right? There's extra letters within it. So ijtanaba is an example of this. Ijtanaba has 3 root letters, right? How you work out the root letters and the extra letters, right? That will come later on. I'm just going to give you the answer, right? Right now, it's not going to be actually be made clear how you actually work out which one of these letters are the 3 root letters and the other ones are extra, right? How you work that out is gonna come through practice and study of Sarf, right? But right now, just bear with me. I'm just gonna give you the answer, right? So ijtanaba, the 3 root letters for ijtanaba is jim, noon, and ba. So the 3 root letters of ijtanaba are jim, noon, and ba. Everything else are extra letters, hence why it falls under the category of mazid fi. So this hamza. So all the letters we haven't counted yet, right? The hamza and the ta, okay, in the middle are extra letters. Right? So these are mazid fi, right? Mazid fi letters, right? So the hamza, and the ta, these are the extra letters. Right? So this verb ijtanaba, along with all of its forms, so ijtanaba, ijtanaba, ijtanabu, ijtanabat, ijtanabata, and so on, these will all be under the category of thulathi mazid fi, not just this form. Remember we said the other forms of the same verb, what category it falls under will depend upon what category the third person singular male form of the verb falls under. They all fall under the same. Alright, category. Ruba'i mujarrad. So ruba'i or ruba'iyun because it is tashdid, if you want to be precise. So quadrilateral verbs when there's four root letters, and a quadrilateral verb can either be like the sulasi mujarrad or mazid fi. It can have four root letters and only four root letters with no extra letters, or four root letters with extra letters. So depending upon whether it has extra letters or not will depend upon whether it's mujarrad or mazid fi. If it doesn't have extra letters, it only has four root letters, then it will fall under the category of ruba'i mujarrad. If it has extra letters, it's gonna fall under the category of ruba'i mazid fi. That's why it's mentioned over here, right? It's mentioned over here. uh, the past tense third person. Remember, we look at the past tense third person singular male form. We don't look at the other forms, right? Because if you look at the other forms, okay, you're not gonna actually be accurate. Okay, the past tense third person singular male form of the verb only has four root letters and no extra letters. Does that make sense? So example, ba'thara. So if you look at the third person singular male form of the verb all the time, you look at the third person singular male form of the verb. So example, ba'thara. Ba'thara is the third person singular male form, and it has four root letters and it doesn't have any extra letters. All of these letters, ba, ain, sa, and ra, are root letters, and there's no extra letters because there's only four letters, right? There's no extra letters over there. And ruba'i mazid fi is when there's extra letters. Right, the past tense third person singular male form of the verb has four root letters with extra letters. So example of that is tasawwara. Tasawwara. Okay. So if you look at this, there's four letters over here along with this extra letter of ta. So there's five letters altogether. So we know that four of these letters are going to be the root letters. So the sin, the ra, the ba, and the lam are the root letters, and the extra letter over here that's actually making this mazid fi, right, is the ta. So the ta is the extra letter, and the sin and the ra and the ra and the ba and the lam are the four root letters. Okay, so the four root letters are sin, ra, ba, lam, the four, and the extra letter is the ta. Right, hence why there's five letters, right? Four of them being root letters and one being an extra letter. Now that we know that this verb, the third person singular male form of the verb, is rubai mazid fi, all of the forms for this verb are also going to be rubai mazid fi.